At dawn, 6 cement trucks filled my private driveway with diesel smoke, trapping my disabled daughter inside our home. The HOA called it community property. They had no idea one legal document would turn their entire project into a disaster. If you believe bullies should lose when the law shows up, subscribe and stay with this story. The day began before sunrise, with thick black diesel smoke crawling through the open desert air and forcing its way into my lungs. I stepped outside expecting quiet, but instead found 6 massive cement trucks parked across my private driveway, their engines rumbling low and steady like animals claiming territory. The smell burned my throat, and the noise vibrated through the ground beneath my boots. My garage was completely blocked, my irrigation van trapped, and the sprinkler line my wife Sarah and I had installed years earlier lay crushed beneath heavy tires. The worst part was not the damage. It was the realization that my disabled daughter could not leave the house. Her school bus could not reach her, and her wheelchair ramp opened directly toward the wall of concrete trucks. She sat inside watching from the window while strangers treated our land like a loading dock. The sense of helplessness settled fast, thick as the smoke hanging in the air. The HOA treasurer stood near the trucks holding a clipboard, smiling as if this were a friendly misunderstanding. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. According to her, the driveway now counted as community property, and the trucks were only temporary. Her tone made it clear she did not expect resistance. She believed authority replaced ownership. I knew better. The property sat on 5 acres at the edge of sagebrush estates, land Sarah and I had built together piece by piece. Every irrigation line was planned by hand, every patch of green coaxed from desert soil through years of careful work. After Sarah's death, that routine became my anchor. Each morning at the same hour, I checked water pressure, tested valves, and listened to the familiar sound of water moving where it was supposed to. It was the one thing in my life that still behaved predictably. The trucks changed that. By mid-morning, concrete dust coated the windows, and the constant hiss of air brakes replaced birdsong. Client calls went unanswered because my work van could not leave the garage. Appointments were canceled, and income disappeared with each passing hour. Spring was the busiest season for irrigation work in Arizona, and every lost day mattered. The truck stayed anyway. The treasurer claimed it was for pool renovations, a minor inconvenience for the greater good. She dismissed concerns about access, damage, and safety with practiced ease. Her words carried the assumption that inconvenience was acceptable when imposed on someone else. The HOA paperwork backed her confidence, filled with vague language about community improvement and shared benefit. I spent that evening reviewing county permits and zoning rules instead of sleeping. The more I looked, the clearer it became that the situation was not accidental. Rental markings on the trucks linked them to multiple construction companies. This was not a short-term staging area. It was a business operation running directly off my property. The realization shifted something inside me. Over dinner, my daughter helped document truck numbers, arrival times, and company names. She treated it like a school project, but I could see the anger beneath her focus. She understood what it meant when adults abused rules to take what did not belong to them. Cameras went up the next day, covering every angle of the driveway and yard. The footage told a clear story. Trucks rotated in and out, equipment was unloaded and reloaded, and crews treated the land as if it were rented space. Money changed hands while damage accumulated. Sprinkler lines leaked underground, water pressure dropped, and plants began to fail beneath layers of alkaline dust. The HOA narrative spread quickly through the neighborhood. I was labeled difficult, uncooperative, and unreasonable. Complaints surfaced about noise and property values, assuming I was the cause rather than the obstruction. The treasurer positioned herself as the problem solver while my silence was interpreted as guilt. That was when the asphalt crew arrived. They did not stop at the edge of the driveway. They paved directly over the front yard, burying Sarah's memorial garden beneath hot tar. Roses she had chosen for drought resistance and meaning disappeared in a single afternoon. The smell lingered long after the crew left, mixing grief with fury in a way I could not ignore. That night, I searched through old documents Sarah had carefully labeled and stored. Deeds, surveys, and easement records filled a worn folder I had not opened in years. Buried deep in legal language was a clause that changed everything. The access road every truck used crossed my land, and the easement that allowed it had expired decades earlier. For years, the community had relied on assumption instead of permission. The weight of that discovery settled slowly. The trucks were not just blocking my driveway. They were trespassing. The power dynamics shifted in a single paragraph of forgotten paperwork. For the first time since the trucks arrived, the situation felt measurable instead of overwhelming. I did not act immediately. I planned. Because pressure, applied at the right moment, always finds a way. The next morning began with the same diesel haze, but something inside me had changed overnight. What had felt like chaos now looked like a system, and systems could be measured, documented, and broken down piece by piece. I stepped outside at dawn, notebook in hand, describing everything the trucks were doing as if I were inspecting a malfunctioning irrigation network instead of my own home being occupied. By 7 a.m., 3 additional trucks had arrived, turning 6 into 9. They parked with deliberate precision, blocking every possible exit path from my garage. Drivers exchanged paperwork with the HOA treasurer, laughing like this was just another job site. My daughter watched from the doorway as strangers walked across our yard without hesitation, boots grinding gravel into soil I had spent years stabilizing. I checked the sprinkler manifold near the side fence and felt my stomach drop. Pressure had fallen dramatically. The crushed PVC lines were leaking underground, forcing water to seek escape through the weakest points. Small geysers bubbled up through the dirt, invisible to anyone who did not understand how irrigation systems behaved under stress. To the HOA, it was dirt and dust. To me, it was structural damage spreading beneath the surface. Calls from clients kept coming. Each one ended the same way, with apologies and rescheduling that might never happen. In this business, reliability was reputation, and my reputation was being buried under concrete tires. The trucks did not just block my driveway. They blocked my livelihood. By mid-morning, I confronted the treasurer again. She listened politely, nodding as if she cared, then repeated the same rehearsed phrases about temporary inconvenience and community benefit. Her clipboard stayed between us like a shield. She never stepped onto the damaged areas. She never looked down. Authority allowed her to remain clean while everything else suffered. That afternoon, concrete dust drifted into my daughter's room, coating her desk and wheelchair frame in fine gray powder. The dust burned plants on contact, killing leaves that had survived years of desert heat. When I complained, the response was dismissive. "A little water would fix it," she said. The irony would have been funny if it were not so destructive. That night, I reviewed the camera footage. Trucks arrived before dawn and left after dark. Equipment rotated in patterns that had nothing to do with pool renovation. Logos from multiple rental companies appeared clearly on the footage. This was not staging. It was commerce. A commercial operation running illegally from residential land. The discovery hardened my resolve. My daughter helped catalog every violation, labeling video files by date and time. She treated the process with calm precision, turning frustration into evidence. Watching her work reminded me that this was no longer just about property damage. It was about what kind of lesson I allowed her to learn from this situation. By Thursday, the neighborhood mood shifted. Complaints surfaced about early morning noise and diesel fumes. Somehow, those complaints found their way back to me instead of the HOA. I was portrayed as the obstacle, the unreasonable neighbor refusing to cooperate. The treasurer framed herself as the mediator stuck dealing with my attitude. Psychological pressure replaced paperwork. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I walked past. The trucks multiplied, and so did the sense of isolation. That was when the asphalt crew arrived without warning. They paved straight across the front yard, burying the memorial garden I had planted after my wife's funeral. Roses she had chosen together with me vanished under black tar while the crew worked efficiently, indifferent to what they destroyed. Permits were waved in my face, stamped and sealed, bearing the HOA signature. By sunset, the yard no longer felt like mine. Standing on the new asphalt, I felt the ground vibrate under passing trucks. Water trapped beneath the pavement had nowhere to go. Pressure built invisibly, just like it did inside damaged pipes. Hairline cracks formed near the foundation, subtle signs most people would miss. I did not miss them. That night, I stopped trying to negotiate. I pulled the old property documents from storage, spreading them across the kitchen table. Deeds, surveys, easement records, and handwritten notes from previous owners filled the space. Hours passed as I traced boundary lines and compared them to modern maps. That was when I found it. The access road. Every truck entering Sagebrush Estates crossed my land. The easement allowing that access had expired decades earlier and was never renewed. For years, the community relied on assumption instead of permission. Legally, the road was mine. The realization shifted everything. I was not trapped. I was the gatekeeper. The next morning, I visited the county recorder's office and confirmed it. The clerk barely reacted, explaining that expired easements were common when developers disappeared and paperwork was ignored. Public use did not equal ownership, especially when the land sat vacant for years. Driving home, the trucks no longer looked imposing. They looked dependent. I contacted a retired police officer friend who specialized in property disputes. He reviewed the documents and laughed, shaking his head. According to him, the HOA had no legal standing to use my land. None. Every truck on my driveway was trespassing. For the first time since the trucks arrived, I slept. Because once pressure was understood, it could be controlled. And I finally knew exactly where to apply it. Friday arrived with the confidence of people who believed they had already won. The trucks lined up earlier than usual, engines idling like impatient animals, their rotating drums humming in rhythm. From my kitchen window, I watched the operation unfold with mechanical precision. This was not a neighborhood project anymore. It was an industrial workflow built on the assumption that my land was theirs to use. I spent the morning installing the final component of the steel gate. The posts were sunk deep, reinforced with concrete, and anchored into soil I understood better than anyone. The hydraulic system responded smoothly, powered through a control panel tied into a timer no different from the irrigation controllers I had installed for decades. Where water once flowed, authority now moved. By noon, the first concrete pour began inside the community. Trucks cycled in and out, each one crossing my property without hesitation. Drivers never looked at the house. They never asked permission. They treated the road like a public utility instead of what it actually was. At 1:45, my daughter stood beside me, laptop open, cameras recording. The neighborhood barbecue had started early, families gathering near the pool, unaware they were about to witness something far more memorable than grilled food and small talk. The treasurer paced near her trailer, clipboard tucked under her arm, checking her watch repeatedly. At exactly 2 p.m., the gate activated. Steel panels swung shut with a heavy finality that echoed across the desert. The sound cut through engine noise, conversation, and music. One truck stopped short, brakes hissing. 3 others were already on my side of the gate, their drivers staring forward in disbelief as their exit vanished. Confusion spread instantly. Radios crackled. Drivers climbed down from cabs, inspecting the barrier as if it might dissolve under scrutiny. Concrete continued to churn inside drums, chemistry ticking forward without concern for authority or schedules. Time, once Gabrielle's ally, became her enemy. She arrived moments later, face flushed, composure gone. Her voice carried across the property, sharp and uncontrolled. She demanded the gate be opened, demanded explanations, demanded compliance. I stepped forward calmly, holding the deed like a quiet weapon. I told her the trucks were trespassing. The word hit harder than any insult. She argued community access, emergency authority, HOA rules. I answered with property law. The crowd from the barbecue edged closer, drawn by raised voices and stopped machinery. Phones appeared. Recording began. Minutes passed. Concrete thickened. At 2:20, the fire chief arrived for a scheduled inspection, his truck navigating carefully around blocked access points. He reviewed the scene with professional detachment, listening to both sides before examining the documentation I provided. The measurements, photos, timelines, and code references spoke clearly. Commercial vehicles had blocked emergency access routes for weeks. That was not a dispute. That was a violation. At 2:30, the chief called for county impound. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Gabrielle's authority collapsed in real time. Her arguments dissolved into accusations. She blamed me, the trucks, the timing, the system. Nothing stopped the process. Tow vehicles arrived, lights flashing, operators moving efficiently. Each trapped cement truck was disconnected and prepared for removal while its load hardened into unusable stone. $30,000 turned solid before anyone's eyes. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. The woman who had dominated meetings and enforced rules now shouted helplessly as her operation unraveled. She tried one final tactic, painting herself as a victim, accusing me of harassment and instability. The crowd did not respond the way she expected. Evidence played on the community screen. Weeks of footage rolled, showing trucks arriving before dawn, equipment crushing landscaping, asphalt poured over private gardens. Her voice echoed clearly through speakers, justifying destruction in the name of progress. The mood shifted completely. By the time the last truck was towed, the HOA treasurer stood alone, clipboard dropped, authority stripped away by documentation and law. I did not celebrate. I simply watched as pressure released itself naturally, like water finally finding an outlet. That evening, silence returned to the property. No engines. No alarms. No dust. Over the following weeks, the consequences settled in. Legal notices arrived. Fines accumulated. Restitution was negotiated. The HOA board dissolved and reformed under emergency elections. Policies were rewritten. Easements were reviewed for the first time in decades. The memorial garden was restored with care, roses replanted where asphalt had once cooled. My irrigation system was rebuilt stronger than before, lines reinforced, pressure balanced properly. The foundation crack stabilized once heavy traffic stopped. My daughter documented the entire aftermath for her civics project, earning recognition beyond the school. She spoke confidently about property rights, accountability, and how systems fail when authority goes unchecked. Watching her present those lessons felt like reclaiming something that had almost been taken from us. The gate remained. Not as punishment, but as clarity. Permission replaced assumption. Access required agreement. Respect became necessary again. Months later, neighbors stopped by not with complaints, but questions. They wanted advice. They wanted understanding. The community changed slowly, cautiously, learning the difference between improvement and abuse. I never sought revenge. I applied pressure correctly. And when the system failed under its own weight, it revealed the truth that had been buried beneath concrete, paperwork, and entitlement all along. Water always found a way. The real fallout began after the trucks were gone, when silence exposed everything that noise had hidden. Without engines masking the damage, the neighborhood finally saw what weeks of unchecked authority had done. Tire ruts scarred lawns. Crushed irrigation lines leaked beneath the surface. Asphalt cuts ended abruptly where plans had never been approved. What had been sold as progress now looked exactly like what it was, exploitation. Legal letters arrived within days. County citations followed. The fines were not symbolic. Each violation carried weight, multiplied by duration and severity. Unauthorized commercial operations. Fire access obstruction. Environmental damage. Trespassing. The list grew longer every time another agency reviewed the evidence. The treasurer stopped answering emails. Her construction trailers disappeared overnight. The HOA board called an emergency meeting without her. For the first time, I attended. I sat in the back, quiet, listening as neighbors asked questions that should have been asked months earlier. Where were the permits? Why was private land used without consent? Who approved asphalt on residential property? No one defended her openly. Silence answered most questions. She resigned before the vote. The board followed with resignations of their own. Temporary leadership took over, attorneys were hired, and a full audit was ordered. Easements were reviewed line by line. Assumptions dissolved under scrutiny. What people believed had been true for decades turned out to be convenience mistaken for legality. The gate stayed closed during the process. Not as leverage, but as boundary. When attorneys approached about reopening access, the conversation changed tone completely. No demands. No threats. Just negotiation. Agreements were drafted. Liability insurance was provided. Restoration costs were acknowledged without argument. That alone told me everything. The memorial garden was rebuilt first. Soil was removed and replaced. New roses were planted beside salvaged stones that had once bordered Sarah's favorite corner of the yard. My daughter helped choose varieties suited for desert resilience, plants that thrived under pressure instead of collapsing beneath it. Watching green return to ground that had been buried felt like breathing again after weeks underwater. The irrigation system took longer. Damage ran deeper than expected. Compacted soil had altered flow paths, requiring a full redesign. I worked methodically, zone by zone, restoring balance the way I always had. There was comfort in the process. Pipes did not lie. Pressure told the truth. Insurance settlements arrived slower, but they arrived. Fines paid for repairs. Lost income was compensated. The asphalt was removed entirely, replaced with native gravel and drainage channels designed to protect both property and foundation. Independent inspectors signed off on every stage, documenting compliance that no one questioned anymore. The community changed its tone. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now asked how to prevent similar issues on their own properties. Some apologized directly. Others said nothing, but listened. Trust did not return instantly. It seeped back gradually, like moisture through dry ground. My daughter's project went beyond school. Local civic groups invited her to present. She spoke calmly about systems, power, and how documentation mattered more than volume. She never raised her voice. She never attacked anyone personally. She explained cause and effect. People understood. Requests for advice came from outside the neighborhood. Homeowners dealing with similar overreach asked how to protect themselves. I answered when I could. The guidance was always the same: know your boundaries, document everything, never assume authority replaces law. The gate became a symbol. Not of conflict, but of clarity. It opened when permission existed. It closed when it did not. Emergency access remained guaranteed under written agreement. Construction schedules respected limits. What had once been chaos turned into coordination. Months later, the former treasurer's company dissolved quietly. No announcements. No statements. Just filings and closures. She did not return to the neighborhood. Her name stopped coming up in conversation, replaced by lessons learned. On a cool evening near the end of summer, I stood in the restored garden as irrigation ran through new lines, water moving evenly across soil that had finally been allowed to breathe. My daughter sat nearby, reviewing notes for another presentation, calm and confident in a way grief had once taken from her. The house felt like ours again. Not because conflict ended, but because boundaries held. What stayed with me most was not the confrontation, or the trucks, or even the moment the gate closed. It was how quickly power collapsed when it lost its shortcuts. Authority built on assumption could not survive contact with evidence. Pressure applied correctly never needed force. It simply revealed truth. The driveway remained quiet after that. No engines at dawn. No dust on windows. The sound of water replaced everything else, steady and reliable, doing what it had always done when allowed to move freely. I never needed revenge. I restored balance. And once balance returned, nothing else had to be said.